Thank you for choosing to participate in our experiment. In the next few minutes, I will be explaining the details of the coalition formation game. Please pay attention because your payoff will be affected by how well you perform in this game. This game is based around forming alliances with other players and together forming groups known as coalitions. The goal of this game is to become part of the final coalition as well as to maximize your personal payoff. Be warned that if you are not part of the final coalition, you will have lost the game and your payoff for the round will be 0. At the start of the game, every player will be assigned a power. Your power will be displayed in the top left of your screen as well as the powers of your opponents. Think of this power as the amount of influence you hold in the game. The greater your power, the more influence you hold. In this game, players or agents will take turn proposing a coalition they would like to see formed from a list of coalitions that they are a part of and are considered to be winning. A winning coalition is a term for a coalition whose members have combined power greater than half the total power of all players remaining in the game. Just a note, if you want to keep the present coalition, the option at the very bottom of the list allows this. Before we move on, let's quickly go over an example of how it is determined whether a coalition is winning or not. Consider a game with 4 players with powers 40, 30, 20, and 10. In order for a coalition to be winning, the combined powers of its members must exceed half the total power of all players. In this case, the total power of all players is 100. Thus, in order to be considered a winning coalition, that coalition must have a total power greater than 50. In this case, a coalition with members 40, 20, and 10 would be considered a winning coalition because it has a total power of 70, which is greater than 50. Conversely, a coalition with members 20 and 10 would not be considered winning because its total power is only 30. Let's assume that the coalition with members 40, 20, and 10 does indeed form. The game would then continue with only these players. Thus, the total power of all players is now only 70, and the minimum amount of power needed for a coalition to be considered winning is now 35. When a coalition is proposed, players who are part of the proposed coalition will vote on whether or not they wish to have the coalition formed. The player who proposed the coalition will automatically vote yes, and all players who are not part of the proposed coalition will automatically vote no. If the combined powers of the players who voted yes is greater than the combined powers of the players who voted no, then the coalition will be formed and anyone not part of the coalition will be removed from the game. The remaining players will then be randomly reordered and the game will continue. If the combined powers of those who voted no is greater than the combined powers of those who voted yes, then the coalition will not be formed, the current coalition will remain, and no players will be removed from the game, and the next person in line will propose a coalition. Let's briefly go over an example of voting. Once again, consider a game with 4 players with powers 40, 30, 20, and 10. Let's assume that it is player 40's turn to propose. They then decide to propose a coalition of 40, 30, and 20. In this case, since player 40 proposed the coalition, they will automatically vote yes. Player with power 10 who has been left out of this coalition will automatically vote no. Players 30 and 20 will then vote either yes or no. If player 20 votes yes and 30 votes no, then the coalition will be formed because 40 plus 20 is greater than 30 plus 10. However, if both 20 and 30 were to vote no, the coalition would fail to form because 40 is less than 20 plus 30 plus 10. The game can end in one of 2 ways. The first way in which the game can end is that only one player remains in the game. The second is that even after all players have had a chance to propose a coalition, the current coalition has not changed. This coalition will be deemed to be the final coalition, and all members who are part of it will split the pot amongst themselves. I will now go over how your payoff for each round will be calculated. If you are not a part of the final coalition, your payoff for the round will be 0. If you are part of the final coalition, then the pot will be split among all players based on the power of each member. The formula for calculating payoff is your power divided by the total power of all players in the coalition, multiplied by the pot. Let's go over a quick example. Let's say that the pot is 10, and the final coalition is a group of players with powers 20, 30, and 50. The total power of all players is therefore 100. Thus, player 20's payoff will be 2, player 30's payoff will be 3, and player 50's payoff will be 5. Before we conclude, let's go over an example game. Consider a game with 4 players with powers 20, 30, 40, and 10, who will propose coalitions in that order. On the first turn, player 20 decides to lessen the number of people to share the pot with by proposing a coalition of 20, 30, and 40. Both 40 and 30 agree to this, and player 10 is removed from the game. The players are then reordered randomly, and the order just happens to end up as 20, 30, then 40. On his turn, player 20 proposes to keep the current coalition of 20, 30, 40. 30 and 40 both vote yes, and the coalition remains the same. On player 30's turn, he also proposes the current coalition, and once again it passes with players 40 and 20 both voting yes. On the final turn, in an attempt to lessen the number of people he has to share the pot with, player 40 proposes a coalition of 40-20. However, player 20 declines this offer, and the game ends. This is because even after everyone has had a chance to propose, the coalition hasn't changed, and thus is stable. Let's assume, however, that player 20, instead of voting no, voted yes on the coalition of 40-20. In this case, player 30 is removed from the game, and the game is now down to 2 players. After the players are randomly reordered, the order is now 40 then 20. On player 40's turn, he sees that he has more than half the power of all remaining players, and thus proposes a coalition of just himself. Thus, player 20 is removed from the game, leaving only player 40. This concludes the instructions for the game. Thank you for listening, and good luck.